I screamed as loud as I could as I tried to make out my way out of the house. If only I could get out to the road. Little Willie lay lifeless in our home. My husband, Willie's own father, had beaten him with an axe, and now he was coming after me. I had to escape. My nearest neighbors were the McClellans. If only I could get there, I would be safe, or so I thought. What had gotten me to this place? How had I gotten here? My name is Polly Scutcheon. My real name is Mary, but everybody calls me Polly. I had immigrated from England to the United States, the land of opportunities, where everything would be wonderful. My husband Henry was also from England. We thought we would have a good life together here. Henry was not a socializer. People didn't know Henry. He stayed to himself, only was around family. However, there is a photo of me from 1904 at the barn raising of the Henry Veneman barn. I was in the photo with my young son, little Willie. You see, I did socialize. Well, when I married Henry, also from England, in 1889, I was 24 and Henry was 30. We rented 40 acres on Arthur and 88th. I thought he could provide a good home for me. I had one 2-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, and I needed someone who could care for us. Then we had 3 sons. Oh, maybe that was part of Henry's problem. Charlie was born the year after we married in 1890. And 2 years later, we had little Willie. Little Willie was born a cripple. He couldn't clothe himself. He couldn't feed himself. As he grew older, the neighbors took up a collection and purchased a wheelchair for him. Then we had George in 1897. All of my sons had health issues. Now you would call them genetic problems, but we didn't know that. They had bad hearts. We had no money for doctors. We did the best we could by caring for our boys at home. But in 1904, Charlie, at the age of 13, passed away in February of that year. Just a few months later, George, only 6 years old, also passed away. Can you imagine as a parent having both of your children die in such a short time? Those 2 boys are buried here in these unmarked graves. We had additional stress in our home as well. We had taken in George Anning. George was also British. He was a defector from the British Navy, and he was trying to hide his real identity, so he had changed his name from George Anning to George Green for fear of the British catching him. When he was here, he was a well-liked man. He was popular. People enjoyed being around him. He operated the bridge over the Grand River at Spoonville. And then he conducted a saloon in Nunica. People thought George had money, and he probably did. But then his wife died, and George took to drinking. When we took him in, he was an object of poverty. He was decrepit. He was nearly 80 years old, and he was on crutches. For us, he was another mouth to feed. The neighbors had noticed that Henry had really started to show some odd signs. He brooded over our poverty and over the situation in our home. My daughter May, who at this point was married and living on her own, had encouraged me to leave him. She feared for my life, but I didn't. That morning was 5 a.m. It was July 21, 1907, and Henry was out of his mind. He had an axe, and he was beating little Willie with the axe. And I tried to stop him, but that's when he turned and he started hitting me too. So I escaped and I got out to the road. Henry realized I had left, and he followed me out onto the road, and he hit me in the back, and I fell to the ground. And there I lay, lifeless. Henry looked at me for a moment, then he hesitated, and he turned back in, and he went back in the house to go after George. Poor George. When they found him, his crutches were 10 feet away from the house, and his beaten body was 70 feet away. Well, Mrs. McClellan and Mr. McClellan across the street had heard all the noise, and they woke up to watch the horror unfold outside of their window. Mr. McClellan went down the street and got our next nearest neighbor, Mr. Lester Timmerman. He then came back with him, but Mrs. McClellan saw me laying in the road, and she came out and she got my body and she dragged me to the front porch. I revived enough to get in the house. Mrs. McClellan locked the front door behind us, and then she took her children by the hand and escaped out the back door. When Henry realized I was no longer in the road, he came charging over, and with his axe and one blow, he broke through the glass window and it shattered everywhere. He made his way into the house through the broken window, and he took his axe and he beat me to death. It was said that my head was nearly severed from my body. Then he went back home, and moments later, Mr. McClellan and Mr. Timmerman appeared. When Henry came out, they said to him, "Back off, stay away." And he said, "I have killed my family, and I will kill you too." They had no choice. Mr. Timmerman had a shotgun loaded with #1 birdshot, and as Henry kept coming, he shot him full on in the chest with the birdshot. Henry fell to the ground, writhing in pain and anguish. They found out later that Henry had every intention of killing himself. He had taken a knife and cut himself 2 times in the right arm and 1 time in the left arm. And then he drank a healthy dose of Paris green, which is a deadly poison. The Paris green is likely what caused his writhing in pain and anguish. And it was said that he was guilty of his own death. Mr. Timmerman and Mr. McClellan were found innocent. It was the Paris green that had killed him. Well, our bodies were laid out at the local mortuary. And as you can imagine, our deaths made national headlines. Here, a little girl immigrated from England to Coopersville, and my story went across the nation. Hundreds of people came to view our bodies as they lay at the mortuary. Likely many of them rode the interurban, which ran between Grand Rapids and Grand Haven, to come see us. Well, all 5 of us are buried here in this unmarked grave. My 2 sons, little Willie, my mad, poor husband, and myself. We would be forgotten except for people like you who carry on our memory. So thank you for coming today and sharing in our story so that my memory can live on. Thank you.